Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Verse and Stars podcast. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is a very special episode because Armin Shimerman returns to the mothership. We discuss his third book in the Illyria series, Imbalance of Power. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Shimerman. Thank you so much for coming back to the Traversing the Stars podcast. It's an honor to speak with you once more.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's totally an honor, sir. I absolutely love your Illyria series, and I think you really brought it home with the last book, so congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very proud of the last book. As I was writing, I got better, and the third book, I think, is demonstrative of that.
So how does it feel to completed this entire trilogy? Where are you from where you started this book, as far as how you thought it was all going to play out?
Well, I'm both relieved and disappointed that it's over. Relieved because it's a huge mountain to climb, and at times it was very arduous. But so I'm glad that I don't have to climb anymore. But I have found in the weeks and months since I wrote the last word that my life is a little empty. That I have nothing to look forward to when I get up in the morning. So there is that sense of disappointment. How has it changed? The story itself has gotten much deeper, more involved, mainly because I had to write two cliffhangers for the first book and the second book. And because of that, it forced me to go into areas I hadn't thought I would originally go into. But that's grand. It took me to places that I became very interested in, and I think the reader will be as interested as I was.
Well, keep in mind, there's always opportunities for sequels to these books. So just
so my publisher tells me. So my publisher tells me.
So, when you were writing the third book, and obviously looking back, because we're going to reflect a little bit upon the trilogy, were there aspects of the book as you were conceiving it that pulled harder than you thought it would, and you found out you were moving more in direction with these characters or this aspect of this character than you originally thought you were going to?
I did. Originally, I thought it would just be my two main characters, Dee and Shakespeare, and the characters of Twelfth Night. And indeed, those are the characters I focus on. But some of the secondary characters in Twelfth Night, which I didn't think I was going to spend a lot of time with, actually sort of took over my imagination. So the character of Diane, the Countess, became much more fleshed out in my mind as I began to write and continue to write than I originally had thought. Certainly, the other characters and where I went with the characters from Twelfth Night was interesting for me as well, because I didn't really have a backstory when I started, but as I wrote and thought about it, the backstories grew and grew and grew, and I had great fun with that. And Shakespeare too began to take over the story. I originally conceived it as Dee as the primary character, and he is, but Shakespeare's growing up pains began to fascinate me as well, and I became very focused on that as well.
Well, I think it's interesting talking about how the characters pulled you as an author to take them in certain directions. Without giving away any spoilers, obviously some characters have fates that did not go as well as others, as far as where they end up in the novel. How did that? Was it hard to make those decisions with those characters? Because some of these characters, as a fan of the book and the characters, I loved some of these characters that maybe things didn't go so well for. How did that? React? How did you react to that, making those decisions with those characters? Was that always how things were going to end for them?
Well, without giving anything away, there's one particular character who has a really bad ending, and but because I based the characters on the characters from Twelfth Night, this character who was just barely mentioned in the play, and most people who are very familiar with the play aren't even aware of this character, although he is mentioned. I knew he had to have a bad ending, so I knew that had to happen. But that too was one of the characters I became fascinated with. As I progressed through the story, and as I did more and more research, I began to wonder how each of these characters was going to end up, and So it wasn't fleshed out when I started. It was just I had an idea of where it was going to go, but not how it was going to go.
Mm. And like I said, I think as a reader, there were some of my favorite characters. I was like, oh no, it was like heartbreaking. But it's a sign of a good writer, by the way, that you can do that.
Well, thank you, thank you. It is, yeah. I mean, those times, those are historical times, weren't kind to people, and if you eschew that, if you don't bring that into the story, then you're not being true to the period. So I felt I had to be true to the period, and also, um, as I said, I needed to do certain things with the characters because of the way they end up in the play.
Mm. Well, the title of the third book is Imbalance of Power. Now, but I thought that was a very fascinating title because it can apply to certain things. It could apply to relationship between England and Illyria. It could be Walsingham and Dee. It could be Arsenio or Orsino and the guys, or even Dee and Shakespeare. So when you thought about the title, which of those relationships were you really focusing in on?
All of them.
All.
Um, Shakespeare is no slouch about doing that in his plays, that he'll give you a line that can go several different ways. And I think most great Shakespearean scholars would agree that he purposely does that. So, Imbalance of Power, if it has different connotations for different people as they read the book, that's grand. And I wouldn't say one is better than the other.
Is there one relationship that you think has the greatest range of the power imbalance in these relations between these characters?
Well, certainly, I think it's the overall religious chaos that's happening, and that in a hierarchical society, one person or one or two people have more power than anybody else. So it's not giving away anything, but the queen and her minions have more power, let's say, than the common man, like Shakespeare would be or Dee would be. And in the same way, in Illyria, we have the hierarchy of the Illyrian court, and so the count has more power than, let's say, some of the others. And going back to Griffin, he as first counselor for Illyria has more power than, let's say, his cousin does.
And I really think an interesting position is Orsino, who
If I may, Orsino.
Orsino, my apologies. Sorry, I'm
Sure,
always
quite
bad
all
with
right.
names. Anyone watching the show knows I'm horrible with names. Orsino, uh,
Orsino, Sino.
Orsino.
Right.
Sorry, I'll
It's
probably
like,
get it wrong one more time. Orsino, sorry.
yeah,
So for Orsino, he's in an interesting situation. He has loyalty, or supposed to have loyalty to Elizabeth, and he's also feeling the pressure of the guys in that entire family as well. Where is he in this power structure?
well, he's caught between loyalty to the queen, which he's espoused, and he's a good Catholic, and he wants to see the Catholic cause prosper, which is not doing in England at that time. And so he's caught between a rock and a hard place. He has loyalty, but he also feels that his soul is somewhat at risk if he does not follow the dictates of the Catholic Church. But he has to make some compromises because he is a minion of the Queen, of Elizabeth I, and so it's a power struggle for him. That's an imbalance of power as well, as it is for several of the characters. He's not the only Catholic in the novel, and people have to have to work it over in their own minds about who they're going to be loyal to. Are they going to be loyal to the church where their soul is at risk, or are they going to be loyal to their monarch where their political careers and their lives are at risk?
So when he is thinking about his position without giving things away, is it a question of his soul versus the life of his people? Because once again, if he stands against England, or he stands against the church, his island could be devastated.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's a tough decisions that the person in authority has to make, uh, and and I hope I put that conflict well in the book so that he has to choose, and uh, I hope for his sake that he makes the right choice. It's a hard choice that he makes, but uh, he has to do what he thinks is right for his people. I think We were talking about his loyalty to the Queen Elizabeth, but you're absolutely right. You put your finger on it. He also has his loyalty to his people, and he takes that very seriously.
I feel like the two characters that grew the most throughout the series, but most specifically book three, is Shakespeare and Orsino.
Right.
I feel like in this book, especially around maybe the halfway point, he really grew into an individual, into manhood, as it were, based on his situation. Do you think that's the first time he really became almost an adult and how he had to look at his power and his position?
You're talking about Orsino here.
Yeah.
As far as my novel is concerned, yes, he's a bit of a dilettante in the first two novels, and he's supposed to be that way. Um, um, and the powers that be in England, primarily Walsingham, doesn't take him too seriously, but considers him a threat simply because of where geographically his island is located between Europe and England. And so we don't take him. He's a bit of a fop. He's he thinks of himself as a well-read man and is not too involved in European politics. But if I may quote someone who once said something to me years ago about my own political career, which was, Armin, you're going to have to make a choice because you're caught between two semis, and if you don't choose, one of the semis is going to run you over. And so I can say that about Orsino as well. He has to make a choice eventually, whether he wants to or not. And eventually he goes with his loyalty. Now we're giving something away, but he goes with his loyalty to the Queen.
And I think another aspect of examination of his character that I found fascinating, with that once again, that we can go into later without going into too many details, is I think he finds himself with a dilemma of what it is to be a man. There's an argument on one side where it is to be strong. It's there's this loyalty, faith, everything else. But the other part of it is his view of erudition, learning, being well read, and whether or not that makes you, can you still be a man if you go in that direction. I kind of feel like he's caught there as well.
Yeah, it's a very Shakespearean question. We have only to look at Hamlet considering Fortinbras and his manliness and Hamlet's own lack of manliness. It's a very Shakespearean question. And as you who have read all three novels now, I'm very concerned with some of the themes that Shakespeare brings up in the plays, this being one of them.
I think another great thing about the third book, which is a little bit different how you approach it from, I think, the other two, is that time feels more tangible in the third book. You make very clear how much time is left. You use time in a very real way to build that tension. So what are some of the ways you are using time to create an effect throughout this book?
Right. There is a relatively lack of, you're absolutely right, relatively lack of a sense of time in the first two books. But as I said earlier, because of one of the cliffhangers that I had, the cliffhanger I had to write for book two, suddenly the question of time became very important in book three because of the consequences of the cliffhanger of book two. And then I began to see the clock is ticking, and we have to build up the tension in the novel in order to get to the climax. So yes, time is very important in book three, and also tangential to this, or maybe not tangential, but as I said earlier, I got to be a better writer as I progressed, and I tried to make the situations a little bit more starker in book three and less arcane, if I may put it that way, or less prosaic. So time became a very important factor in book three. And because the clock is ticking away, John Dee, who is mostly affected by this clock, is very concerned for himself and for his family.
How does that time and desperation affect how Dee approaches his goal of finding the spies of Illyria?
Well, it lights a fire under him. If he didn't have one before, he certainly has one now because he only has, the book tells us he only has 6 months to complete what he has to do. and being a total novice at what he's doing, he sees time slipping away, and then there are the incidents that happen that cause him to lose time, in the sense that things happen that he's just incapacitated, or Shakespeare's incapacitated, and so time is lost that way, and just trying to learn his craft as a spy is an impossible situation when the clock is ticking, and he knows that if he doesn't get it done in the 6 month period that he's been given, that all will be lost to him. Especially what matters most, I think, to him, not only his life and his family, which is certainly most important, but also his reputation, which he's very concerned about.
And I think another interesting aspect of D and how this book kind of changes his situation just a little bit, and I don't think this is a spoiler. If it is, please let me know. We'll cut it. Is that it's mentioned early on, or it's kind of made clear early on, that he's outed as being a spy for the Queen. It's no longer much a secret that he's trying to hide. It's pretty much assumed by everyone around him. You're a spy. That's why you came here. Does that make his job easier or harder? Because I know there's an issue, some thought of secrecy and maybe some guilt that goes along with that. Is it better just be open and do your job openly like that, or was the secrecy part of what was helping him?
Well, I think originally he wants to keep it a secret because he thinks spies should be secret. But I think he finds out eventually that everyone has figured it out. Everyone has told him on the island, "We know why you're here." The islanders are not stupid, and so eventually he just has to accept that they know who it is, and the relationships slightly change because they know who he is. He knows that they know who he is, and therefore he can both be a little bit more open and at the same time be a little bit more secretive. But yeah, his being a spy was a closeted thing in the first two books. Maybe it's open in the second book, but certainly in the first book. And again, it's part of his education. We know from history that at this time, people sort of knew that people were spying on them, and they could sometimes use that to feed the spies false information, disinformation, I think we call it nowadays. Um, and so I sort of wanted to incorporate a little of that in the novel as well.
And so not only is D outed as a spy, but because D's out as a spy, Shakespeare is outed as being a spy with him. How does Shakespeare handle that outing? Because I know he just feels some senses of guilt that he mentions. Does this opening make it worse that now that everyone knows that he's a spy, or is it better for him as well to have it open, feel a little less that he's hiding things from his friends?
Well, he likes his relationship with Orsino a great deal. He finds Orsino to be an interesting man, and one that he wants to get close to. So when his knowing that Orsino knows that his boss is a spy, sort of darkens that relationship a little. But as a writer, he finds it a little fascinating to think, well, my God, I'm a spy now, and I'm just a rustic from the Midlands in England, so he finds that exciting. He also has a problem. He has a moral problem that one of the characters we meet, one of the historical characters, excuse me, he doesn't want to betray the trust that person put in him, and he has to weigh that decision. How loyal can he be to his childhood friend and at the same time be loyal to his employer, who is a servant of the Queen?
And another aspect, like you said, his friend that he kind of alienates a little bit is Orsino. I think I said it right that time.
You did say it wrong, but that isn't the friend I'm talking about. He does alienate Orsino, absolutely. And this happens more perhaps in the second, although it bleeds into the third. Robert Debdale, thank you. Robert Debdale, who is a historical figure, who was a childhood friend of Shakespeare's, who I put in the middle of this story, who historically was a Jesuit or student of the Jesuits, who's coming to England to help practice Mass, which has been forbidden in England. And he doesn't want to betray his good Catholic friend's trust, but at the same time, if he doesn't betray that trust, he's being disloyal to his employer, who is giving him so much.
Well, one interesting that I know we discussed in previous interviews is obviously Shakespeare learns a lot in his relationship with Dee. Now, what has he learned in his relationship with Orsino?
Orsino? I would say charm. I would say about what it is to be a ruler. One of the things that people who don't believe that William Shakespeare from Stratford wrote these plays, is they say, well, how does a rustic know anything about court activities? And there are lots of answers you can give for that. But my answer is, in this book anyway, that he's been in court. He's been at the very highest levels of court. At least he's been eavesdropping on those levels. And so he's learned from Orsino, who he finds to be debonair and exciting and sexy. I guess that's the best word for it. And so he's attracted to that. It's fascinating for him, and he doesn't want to betray that friendship, as you alluded to just now. But at the same time, he is loyal to the crown, and it's a difficult situation to be in. We've all been in those situations that we're between a rock and a hard place, and we don't know which way to turn. And several of my characters have that dilemma.
Because I mean, not only does he have that his relationship with Orsino, but I think it does. Is that somewhat hurting his relationship with Dee? Because he starts doubting Dee. Not only is he doing the right thing, but the moral compass of Dee he's questioning as well throughout the novel. So how's that being impacted because of how what I'm saying, what's going on with Orsino
Yeah,
as well?
I think that's very perceptive of you to have seen that, because indeed he begins to doubt the employer that I've been talking about, John Dee. They all accuse him not only of being a spy, but also of being a witch. And Shakespeare begins to think, well, and I'm giving something away here. Shakespeare begins to think that maybe he is a witch. Maybe I've been on the wrong side all this time, and maybe I need to readjust my line of thinking. Again, being between a rock and a hard place, and the young Shakespeare has to determine what is his course of action. It's one of the many subplots that I've incorporated into the novels.
And like I said, and as I know I mentioned it before, but the relationship between Dee and Shakespeare is the highlight of the trilogy of books that you wrote, and they're written so well. And it is interesting to see how that relationship developed in the third book. And I think one of the interesting parts is I feel like as Shakespeare has matured in these books, he's able to look at his master teacher Dee in a very different way.
Right, and that isn't that something that we all go through when we're young and we have favorite teachers. We think of them as gods. We think of them as there's nothing wrong. And then when we begin to know them a little better, we see that they're only human, and that they have foibles, and that they're not. We don't put them on as high a pedestal as we did before. And I was trying to do that. Shakespeare is maturing during the course of the novels, and that was always part of the idea. How does he change from being a boy of 16 into a young man, not much older, let's say about 17 or 18, but certainly during a maturation process where he changes from being a naive sort of person to a person who is capable of perhaps beginning to write those plays that we know that he's written.
And like I said, I think you did tremendous. I think another character that I really enjoyed, and I think you gave us more of a look at this character more than you have in any of the other books. Francis Walsingham, because you offer a moment of Walsingham by himself, his focus on him, which I don't think happened in the other two novels at all.
No. Yes, I wanted that because Walsingham to me is he hovers over the first two books because he's the instigator of the action. But I, as we said before, I became interested in certain characters. Walsingham was one of them, and I wanted to deal with him standalone, where he wasn't actually dealing with the Dee and Shakespeare story, but rather dealing with his responsibilities as the foreign minister for Queen Elizabeth and as the spy master for the Elizabethan crown as well, which he was. Almost everything that I do talk about in the three novels is steeped in history. And I hope to give the reader both a history lesson, but not I hope one that isn't too pedantic, and at the same time something that excites their imagination.
Well, I think you definitely did that with Francis Walsingham, who was fascinating enough that on Amazon I bought a book about about his biography because
Good,
I wanted
good.
to learn more about his character.
He is a fascinating guy. He is certainly, if one is familiar with the Elizabeth movies, Kate Blanchett, I believe, is the lead in them. Walsingham is a huge character in that. He's played by Jeffrey Reed, and Walsingham and Cecil both. Although I don't deal so much with Cecil, but these were two of the Queen's main ministers, and without them, the reign of Elizabeth I would be a lot less terrific without them. Elizabeth was a force of nature in her own right, but because she had those two guys at her side, um, she was capable of doing extraordinary things.
Well, one interesting thing when I did a little bit of research on Walsingham, in his will on December 12th, 1589, he wrote, "The greatness of my debts and the mean state shall leave my wife and heirs." And in other words, he it basically points out that he's very worried about the situation that he's leaving his wife and family in.
In debt.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, he seems very not compassionate about the same situation, who's worried about making sure he's funding for his wife, who's now away from his family, concerns about what's going on with his family while he's gone. So why do you think Walsingham's unable to empathize with Dee's situation, considering his situation isn't so much better either?
Right. Well, that's an excellent question. So, yes, Walsingham died not a rich man at all, and the reason why he wasn't a rich man was that he was so loyal to the crown that he sponsored a whole army of spies in various capitals in order to spy on the European powers and be able to get information to give to the Queen. But the Queen didn't give him any money to do that. The government didn't give him any money to do that. He paid it out of his own pocket. And because he did that, when he was getting close to dying, he was not dirt poor, but he was poor. And so why doesn't he commiserate with Dee, who has the same problems? Well, I don't have to tell you how many people never realize that what's happening to other people is also happening to them, and that they have no compassion for the other person when they're suffering the same thing. And that's a tragedy in humanity, that we can't understand or empathize with people who are in the same boat. We always think we're different or unique, and it's only happening to us and not to anybody else. And screw everybody else. I just have to have my own way. And Walsingham was quite capable of saying screw you to everybody else. And he always thought he was doing it for the Queen, but one could also argue he was doing it for his own sake and for his own reputation and for his political power. If he didn't succeed after all, the Queen would get rid of him. But he did succeed, and she was grateful for it.
I find it fascinating that you're mentioning that the state doesn't pay for the spycraft, because that's such an integral part, it feels like, of governing or security.
It wasn't then. The idea of having spies in various capitals was relatively new. I'm not saying Walsingham was the only one doing it. He wasn't. But it was a relatively new way to go about getting information when you needed it from other countries. So, and he wasn't the only spy master. Who was it? Leicester, I believe, also had spies. So did Cecil. But Walsingham's was the largest and the most expansive. And because it was expansive, it was the most expensive as well.
So, obviously, for those who read the second book, Walsingham is infuriated with Dee for leaving Illyria and going back home. Now, is that anger stemming from feelings of Dee being disloyal to the state, or is it because it literally was his own money now and it's a personal hatred because he did that?
It's a personal hatred, but not about money. He sent Dee there to do something for him. He needed information. He believed strongly, Walsingham believed strongly, that the island is being used for nefarious reasons to get the Catholic revolutionaries, the seminary priests, in England. And he wants that information. He wants to be able to go after Orsino, but he needs proof. Walsingham needs proof. So the fact that D leaves his mission to come back to England, to London, outside of London actually, um, for his family's sake, he just thinks that's disloyal, and repugnant, and he has a bitter personal hatred against D for having given up his mission, and so it's both personal and political at the same time, and only I won't say that because that is giving something away. But only at the orders of others does he sort of allow D a certain amount of time to finish his mission.
Does Walsingham have an axe to grind with Illyria? Because he does seem to be intent on finding someone there. Once again, how personal is this?
Illyria is a threat to English governance. The English government historically believed that the Jesuits were actively inciting English people to rise up against their queen and to overthrow the queen and to get rid of the queen, and in most cases to replace her with Mary Queen of Scots. That's all history. So this island is a threat to English security, and Walsingham is in charge, as his post as foreign minister, of English security. And so this is a major threat to him. And if he can't get this threat fixed, he's not doing his job, and he's being disloyal to the queen that he's given his life to serve.
And like I think that makes him a very fascinating character, Walsingham. And it was a pleasure to get his things from his perspective in I think it was 2 chapters. And I thought that was amazing. I think another part of the book that I was really amazed by, and if you don't mind, can I'll give a quote to the book, if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah.
You write that D thinks that he has been willfully blind to the cruelties of his error. The world is a sordid pit, not an ivied hall, where erudition and reason rule. Evil has grown progressively worse. Now, I found that a fascinating quote from him, not only because he has participated in evil before, I believe under Mary's rule, he was doing some horrible things. So was he willfully naive, or is he ignorant of his own spot in this violence throughout history?
I would answer both are correct. I absolutely believe he was naive. I think, like any of those 40s movies where we have, professors from universities, that they're only caught up with their studies, and the outside world doesn't affect them, and they get sort of curmudgeonly or finicky about themselves. So I think that's part of who D is. But I also think that he just didn't want to see it. He wanted to believe that he's a philosopher as well. He wanted to believe that man was intrinsically good, and that if you could reason with people, they would see the light. And unfortunately, he finds out that isn't always so. If I can jump from 400 years into the future, we see that happening in our own American politics right now. You reason with people, but they don't necessarily can't see the reason for whatever reason.
I actually read a fascinating study about that, about current history, that the more you debate somebody on an issue, the more that person digs their heels in and refuses to hear the evidence. I found that a fascinating problem.
It is absolutely true. And again, referring back to my little bit of politics, where I've involved myself in politics, but not federal politics, not state politics, but union politics. I found that to be absolutely true. The more you debated someone and gave them facts, or the other way around, if they gave me facts, yes, I would dig my heels in and say, no, you're just not hearing me. The truth was I wasn't hearing them as well as I should have.
And I think one fascinating thing as well with D is that, being that he's come to that realization about the plight of humanity, he does, I don't think this gives anything away, has a vision or divines that there's a bright future that's coming anytime soon. So how does he balance the contradiction between the reality he's seeing and this future that he believes is just around the corner?
Well, I don't think that's a conflict at all. And that is, again, historically correct. D was not the only one, believed that the stars had told them that there was going to be a golden era coming any moment now. and I can't remember the year, but I do have it in the novel. And um, and so he believed that because of the fall of Adam, that men were not perfect, yeah, but in this golden era that was coming, men would be lifted up. That there would be a period of when everyone there was peace among their neighbors, when everybody could get along, and a time of harmony. So, but it hadn't come yet, and so they were still waiting in the cesspool of man's fall from grace. So that's grace was coming soon. It just hadn't come yet. And that this golden era for D, the historical D, as well as the D in my novel, is akin to the Arthurian times when everything seemed to be perfect. And but even in those Arthurian times, there was always problems. Lancelot is not a perfect counselor to King Arthur. So, but the stars had told him that this golden time, this golden era, was coming soon, and he believed that he was a prophet for those times, and that he wants to get back to London to do that, to be a prophet, and he feels exasperated that he's stuck on this island doing this political thing.
So when he's thinking about the period of grace coming, is he thinking in terms of his lifetime, or when he means soon, does he mean?
He means in his lifetime. The
Wow.
stars had told him it was coming. I can't remember the exact amount of years, but it was only a couple of years, 7, 8 years, I think, at the most. And that it was coming. The stars had told him that. He was not only an astrologer, he was not only an astronomer, he was also an astrologer. And in fact, he's one of the great achievements in his own lifetime that he accomplished was he read the stars and he told Princess Elizabeth what was the perfect date for her to become the queen, which she took him up on, and she always attributed her long reign to the fact that John Dee had given her the perfect day to become queen. So he believed in the stars. He believed what he could read there, and the stars told him that a new era of harmony, of peace, of understanding, of ecumenicalism was coming soon, and that he was going to be the prophet, the prophet in the wilderness, who was going to tell people that.
And I think that, to me, that's absolutely fascinating and interesting. His view of a future and his belief in that, considering he is in some way a very scientific-minded individual.
Yeah, science. We think of astrology as less than science. Not in those times. In those times, astrology and astronomy were co-equals, and people believed in that. The Queen believed in it. A lot of people believed in it. It was a different time, and we cannot use our perceptions in the 21st century to criticize those people, because that's what they believed in, and we have to accept them. Especially when you're writing a historical novel, you can't see them through the prism of the 21st century. You have to see them through the prism of what they themselves believed in, and that's what I tried to do there. Is to have people reacting in a way that is right and fits in with that period of time.
Was that difficult to do for you, to view things?
No. I've spent my lifetime studying this period. I spent my lifetime studying Shakespearean plays, and that led to the study of the period. So I have huge collections of books on this period, and I've read most of them. And they have taught me to think like an Elizabethan would think. Certainly when you're, if I may put on my other hat, when you're an actor, and you're performing a character, if you don't think like the character thinks, and you think like a 21st century actor, your performance is not going to be as valid as it could be.
I think another character that you did a great job with is Toby Belch, who's I think one of the most fun characters in the entire trilogy. And I was fascinated that he is a character that shows up in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night as well. So right. How did you adapt that version of him to suit the purpose of your trilogy?
Well, most people have seen Toby as a sort of a junior Falstaff, a fat man who's only interested in drinking and eating. But if you study Twelfth Night, there's only one reference to eating and drinking that Toby has, and that's the famous line, "Will there be no more cakes and ales?" That's the only time he references food or drink. He does say we'll go out and have a drink, but he's not Falstaff. He's not constantly drunk. So I began to think of even before I started writing these books, I began to think of Toby as I can't put it any other way, as a leading man who was over the hill. At one time, uh, he was thought handsome and daring and exciting, but now sort of over the hill and has fallen on hard times. And in fact, in the play, he is subservient to his niece, Olivia. Now, again, going back to the way people thought at that time, for a man to be subservient to a woman was difficult in those times. Even considering that the head of the government, the English government, was a woman, and there were a lot of problems with that. That's why people were trying to constantly get rid of Elizabeth, because they didn't like it that there was a queen on the throne and not a king on the throne. There were other reasons as well, but in the play, Toby is upset about that, and I referenced that a tiny bit because this story takes place before the play, and I'm dealing more with his subservience to his richer, more aristocratic, more successful first cousin, Griffin, um, and so I had a great deal of fun. If I don't have fun with Toby, then those people familiar with the play will think the book is less than successful because Toby and Andrew Aguecheek are the great comic characters of Twelfth Night.
So when you're thinking about Toby, he's a fascinating character because it's a question of loyalty with him. Is he loyal to a crown? Is he loyal to Illyria? Is he just loyal to himself and the money he thinks he can make? So in your opinion, what loyalty does he actually have? And is that loyalty stronger than his hatred of Lord Griffin?
I think you hit it when you said the last one. In my opinion, Toby is loyal to himself. And anyway, forgive me, there's a little bit of my Star Trek character Quark and Toby. Whatever way that he can make some money, get ahead, he will. And he has this lifelong dislike for his successful cousin, which is only made worse by the fact that his first cousin, who he dislikes Toby even more. So there's this bitterness between the two of them, and I know that when I wrote it, what I thought was any way that he could get some comeuppance on Griffin, on his cousin Edmund, he relished. He wanted to do that, and Dee sort of plays to not only getting his comeuppance, but also saying, if you help me out, the crown will reward you in some way. And I think having that sort of recognition from royalty appeals to Toby's ego.
I think it's fascinating how astute Dee is to see that in Toby. That is he naturally good at reading people, or is he good at reading someone like Toby?
I think I didn't do enough of this actually, but I think he's naturally good at reading people. He tends to be less loquacious than Shakespeare, for instance. I think he's quiet for a reason. He's checking people out. He's seeing what they're thinking. He's evaluating them. He is a scientist. He's looking at what's being given him, and he's evaluating what the facts are.
So his understanding of people, does that come from his incredible library that he's read? Is it book understanding of people, or is it from experience understanding people?
I would say both. I think the first is from the book understanding. I think the ancients have taught him something about humanity in a bookish sort of way, but that's not really good enough. So because he's had his ups and downs in the professions that he has chosen, he's learned to read people, and that's what any courtier worth of salt would do in any court in Europe. is to learn to read where the wind is blowing, how the wind is blowing, and to try to get the best of the situation. And I think D is able to do that. Um, he uses people for his own ends. He's a little bit more compassionate than I would say Toby is, but at the same time, he's got his own interests, and I believe that's another thing. People could be kind, people could be good in this period of time, but it was a dog eat dog era, and you had to learn to protect yourself as best you could.
So, in your opinion, when you're constructing D, does D like people generally speaking, or is you know what I'm saying? Like, 'cause I know, like I said, he has a belief that he wants people to be better. He has idea of this great pure period coming up. Does he though like people generally speaking?
No, 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 he doesn't like people. He likes books. He likes to be alone with his books. He likes the people who have written books, who are long since dead. I don't think he's a little bit of a curmudgeon, and he's a scholar. He likes to be alone with his books, which to some extent gives him an affinity for Orsino, who also likes to be alone with his books. But Orsino is a much more cosmopolitan man who's quite capable of being with people, entertaining people, enjoying the moment. I think Dee does not like people, and the fact that he's being forced to do this mission, which takes him away from his books and from again his proselytizing of this coming golden era that's coming up. Pax was it Pax Elizabeth Elizabethana? What is it? There's a term for it, and I've just forgotten what it is. I use it in the book, and I can't remember. Let's just call it Pax Elizabeth. That's not right then. This new era of Elizabeth, where she will be not only the Queen of England, but sort of the controlling force of Europe, which is what the stars have sort of told him. And I have to tell you that historically, it wasn't just England believed that Elizabeth might be this reigning monarch, but also the Habsburgs believed that as well. So,
And I think it's interesting that Dee uses his books as a way to gain knowledge, gain some revelations. Orsino, who's also, as you said, a fascinating with books, seems to be using. I mean, what is his purpose of becoming that well learned?
well, this was happening a lot in that period and period before that. There were a lot of rulers who came to believe that military might was not the only thing of value in the world, and that scholarship, education, knowledge was also valuable. And I think Orsino is part of that tradition of of wanting to be more knowledgeable about things in general. It was a period of discovery, as I say at the very beginning of the first book. It was a period when people were learning there was a whole world, a whole cosmos out there that they weren't aware of. And then suddenly they're being told, guess what? The Earth isn't the center of the universe. Guess what? There are people that we've never heard of that live in the Pacific. Guess what? There's a new world out there that Columbus discovered, 100 years earlier. Guess what? We're finding out things about physics and chemistry that we didn't know before, about medicine that we didn't know before. They wanted to be in the forefront of learning these new scholars, these new scholar rulers or ruler scholars, and I believe Orsino is part of that tradition.
And I think it's another part that's very fascinating. There's a line that you have Dee say that he's like murmuring, kind of like horror struck that's what you wrote, and I kind of want to discuss it. The line that you wrote is, "The first bloodshed in the world was done for religion." In many ways, it shows, in my opinion, that Dee is very aware of the dangers of religion. But on the other hand, he's an extremely religious man. So how does that
work? Okay, so it's a great question. Again, going back to the parameters of 1583, that period of time, as was many periods of time, were enormously religious. People believed in religions. People I mean, that is the cause of the conflict in England and Europe. People are dying for their religion. Protestantism is only about 100 years old or less, and people are dying for that new religion, or they're dying for the old religion, for Catholicism. Religion is enormously important. But Dee, being a practical man and trying to get ahead in life and thinking about his own career, has worked both sides. When it was convenient to be Catholic, he was Catholic. When it was convenient to be Protestant, he was Protestant. And he's not the only person who ever did that in this period of time. And so he's religious because everybody is religious, but he's not as faithful as some of the other people that lived at that time who are dying for who for instance, we talked about Robert Debdale, who will die for his religion, and did die for his religion. There were a number of there's a little section about Edmund Campion, a famous martyr to the Catholic cause, died for his religion, left England for his religion. It is a religious time. In fact, it is required in Elizabethan times in England that you have no choice, you must go to Protestant church once a month. If you did not, you get fined. And if you go enough times, you really get fined, because each time it got exponentially more expensive to not go to church. And this, in fact, happened to Shakespeare's father. Or at least we believe that happened to Shakespeare's father, that he just didn't go to church, and the fines kept rising, so much so that Shakespeare's father was never seen out of his house after a period of time. Just wouldn't leave the house because he was afraid somebody would clap him on the shoulder and say, "You owe us money for not going to church." It's an enormously religious time where people can be very devout about their religion, and on the other hand, could just go whichever way the stream was flowing. It's the devout Catholics believed that the less than devout Catholics in England would rise up against the Queen because she was not a devout Catholic, and they counted on that. They were in a bubble about that, and as it turned out, that bubble was a fantasy. It didn't happen at all.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting as well is, it's another quote I'm going to read. It's a little longer, but so I apologize to my listeners, but I'm going to read the full quote because it's a good one. Is how that connects to Shakespeare. There's a point in the book, without giving anything away, where Dee is trying to kind of soothe Shakespeare, who's very upset about something that has occurred. And Dee, it says that Dee apologizes. Of course, you seek answers, but tell me, who can know the precise word of God? Shall we not think that the Lord above, who knows all and sees into the hearts of men, can discern that the contradictions of warring churches were at times meaningless to him and themselves, that divergent dogma can be different sides of the same coin? Might the deity in his infinite wisdom and mercy shake his head ruefully at our ignorance? And you wrote that this is contrary to every sermon Will has ever heard. So once again, a man who's very religious, who is fighting for one side of the church between Protestants and Catholics. That's a very fascinating realization that he's making there. Or not realization, but something he's imparting to Shakespeare. And I think that's very interesting. Right.
I mean, thank you for reading that. I know exactly where that takes place in book 3. Let's call a spade a spade. I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
So I don't see. I mean, I'm a student of what happened between the Catholics and the Protestants, but I really don't see that much of a difference. I do see a difference. That's not true. But the differences to me are minor. But to them were huge. And so there's a little of that point of view, is that really the differences between these two religions, and if I may say, especially between Anglican Protestantism, which is English Protestantism, and Catholicism, they aren't that different, really. But people are dying over that difference. And lots of people are dying over that difference. We call Bloody Mary, Elizabeth's sister, half-sister, the lady who reigned before Elizabeth, Bloody Mary, because she killed so many Protestants. Elizabeth, in her reign, killed maybe not as many, but killed her share of Catholics. So it seems, if I'm sitting in the throne of heaven thinking, what are these people doing? It's not that important. It's not it's ridiculous, and that's so the impetus for that line.
So how does Shakespeare take the understanding? Because in many ways, that line that Dee is saying is also kind of saying, as an undercurrent, what we're doing here on some level, there's a meaningless to this, because even if, obviously there's loyalty to Elizabeth, but we're basically fighting over nothing in doing this.
Right. If I may, and only because I've been watching TV for 3 days recently, and perhaps so have you, and some of the people listening, we're watching the Republican Party squabbling over something that is relatively minor, that about the Speaker of the House, and it's just a squabble, an internecine squabble, and I just picture Dee. He wouldn't have been aware of this because I wrote this before any of this happened. But he's aware that what's important is that people get along, that they rationalize, that they learn the world better. This squabbling over the niceties of religion just seems like too much for him. And at the same time, he can't absolutely disregard it because he does believe in some of this. He does believe in heaven. I mean, he spent his life trying to talk to angels. So he does believe he gets a divine inspiration at times from heaven. So he does believe in heaven, but his angels have never told him, who should sit as should the Bishop of Rome be the head of the church, or should the Queen of England be? He's never gotten those messages. So he has to believe that this squabbling over territory, over geography, over precedence, over hierarchy, is just a waste of time. What's important is that everybody in a couple of years would all get together. It'll be a golden era when all of this is put aside. And that's what he's looking forward to. But he's still living in this era of discontent.
So his beliefs of when he talks about the church, the quote I just read, is that something he always had that deep feeling about, or in experiencing things with Orsino, who is a Catholic, but on the same side is kind of also with Elizabeth, is he beginning to realize more and more that this squabble is there's a pointlessness to it?
Yeah, I would venture to say that he always knew that this was pointless. It's why I think it's easy for him to switch sides when the time calls for him to switch sides. He has no problems going. Now, his history dogs him, and it will be used against him. The Protestants will say, you used to be the chaplain for one of the worst Protestant killers in Mary's reign, Bishop Bonner. So I think it's easy for him to switch. If he has any bright lines that he does believe in, I've, as the writer, never incorporated that into the story. He might have, but in my research on him, I can't find any. He probably did have some, but I can't find any.
There's also another good quote in this book, if you have the time. It talks about, I'm going to probably pronounce the name wrong, Aquinas. Am I saying it correctly? Aquinas.
Aquinas.
Aquinas. Sorry, at least I'm really bad at this stuff. Aquinas. Yeah. And once again, Shakespeare's looking at it and he says, does he not instruct there are things that are three things necessary for salvation of man: to know what he ought to believe, to know what he ought to desire, and to know what he ought to do. Now, I believe that connects. In that moment, he's talking about Orsino. However, is he not also then talking to Shakespeare about himself and trying to figure out what he's supposed to be doing in his life?
Yeah, certainly we're doing that. And Aquinas was one of the church fathers who taught morality to the congregation, to the entire world. And so it's this is Dee is introducing Shakespeare not only to the scholars of the Roman and Greek world, but he also, I think, is introducing him to the church fathers as well, who have their sense of philosophy. After all, most of the philosophy at that time was coming from the church fathers, and they were to be respected in that sense. You don't necessarily have to agree with their religion all the time, but you can appreciate their knowledge and their understanding of the world. So Shakespeare indeed uh, is learning not only from the books he's reading, but from the mentor who is interpreting those books for him.
And like I said, I really think you just did a brilliant job with all these characters. And I will say, as the books went on, I found them feeling more and more real. That you felt like, after a new book, you felt like you introduced to your friends again. Oh, hey, it's these guys. Is there any thought about potentially publishing the book like Lord of the Rings has as one full volume at some point?
Originally, that's what it was supposed to be. I think I may have discussed this with you before. Originally, it was supposed to be one full volume, but when the publishers found out how many words I had, they went, "Oh no, we can't do that. It's too large." So, but it will come out as a box set on the 24th of January, and you can buy the entire box set. And although it's 3 books, if you buy the box set, we have one edition. So you do, in a sense, have one book. But I don't think. I mean, you could. It would be easy to do. You just print it out as one book. But right now, there's no desire or inclination to create it as one book. It is now 3 books, but it's a trilogy, and the books go together. And like the Lord of the Rings, you can finish with one book, but the story isn't over until you get to the end of the 3rd book of the Lord of the Rings.
And I would recommend to the readers, like I said, if you read the first book and the second book, the third book is fantastic. I think you definitely got even better with the third book. So I want to tell you how much we
one of the
appreciate
things I appreciate that. Thank you for that very much. I got better. It's just like anything. The more you do it, the better you get. And I began to some of the arcane stuff that I was interested in the first 2 books, in the way of description, especially. I realized not necessary. Let's just make it simpler. So the 3rd book, in a sense, I think, and I'm prejudiced, but I think is easier to read than the first 2 because the narrative is less arcane. The dialogue is still of the period, but the narrative around it, I think, is a lot easier to read.
Well, I mean, I found it to be a very fast read. It was one of those books that once you got through the first chapter, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. And I just, like I said, I think you did a fantastic job. So what is next for you?
My publisher wants me to write a sequel to this, but it is a daunting mountain to contemplate. And I'm of a certain age where I'm not sure I want to face that mountain again. I have, however, as I said to you in answer to one of your earlier questions, I find myself with nothing to do recently. And I have started the very beginnings of thinking of a plot outline for a play that deals with the same period, doesn't deal with John Dee, does deal with Shakespeare. And I'm beginning to stick my toe in those waters and to begin to write things. I've got about 5 pages written of a play, and I stopped for a while because I started something I didn't do with the book. I began to chart what is it I wanted to write in the play and set guideposts, milestones where I could, these are what I want to write about in the play, which I didn't do in the novels. So that's the next writing thing that I had in mind because the days get rather long when you don't have something to sit down and write about.
Can you kind of give us a little hint of like is this going to be like a more of a drama, is more a comedy? Can you kind of give us a little hint of which direction you're headed in?
It will probably be a drama. It's set in the Globe Theater. That's as much as I can tell you right now. And in the original Globe Theater. And it deals with William Shakespeare towards the end of his career and facing a career that's mostly finished and getting of a certain age. And it should not be of any surprise that these are things that interest me as a person who himself is in that same position. So.
Well, like I said, when you're ready to talk about it, come back on the show. You've been awesome every time I had a chance to speak with you, and I look forward to doing it at least a few more times.
Well, I look forward to too. Your questions are wonderful, and they force me to think about things I've done. which is lovely, actually. And I'm also grateful for all the nice things you said about it, and to all those who are listening. The book comes out on the 24th of January. The series is called Illyria. It's out by Jumpmaster Press, and if you're looking for it, you can find it on Amazon, or you can go to www.jumpmasterpress.com or my website, arminshimerman.com, and purchase the books either individually or as a set.
And I will point out for my listeners, if you look at the notes, you will find the websites to links, the websites to both Jump Press and also to Armin Shimerman. So go find it when you're done watching the video. So
and let me know what you think. Go on my Twitter account and tell me what you think.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Shimerman. You're amazing. You're definitely my favorite.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a pleasure. Thank you. You too.